This episode of the Old Dogs REI Network is brought to you by Mino Studio.
In a world where jobs are how most people make money, one man, one desire, one challenge dares to break the mold. Welcome to the Old Dogs REI Network, where we don't work for money. Money works for us. Coming soon. Viewer discretion advised.
Welcome to the Old Dogs REI Network, where cash flow is king. Real estate investing, the means, so you can enjoy your retirement dreams. This is the show where we cut right to the chase. No sales pitch, no long monologues, just simple how-to real estate investing advice, so you can earn the passive income you need to enjoy your retirement today. And now, your host and chief old dog, Bill Manacero.
Welcome to the Old Dogs REI Network. I'm your host, Bill Manacero, and this is a show where 50-plussers and anybody else who wants to join us get solid, no sales pitch real estate investing advice to help generate real cash flow. This podcast airs twice weekly on Mondays and Fridays, and if you aren't already a subscriber, go to iTunes or Apple Podcasts, type in Old Dog, spelled D-A-W-G, find our podcast and subscribe. Well, we've got a fun show for you today. We have a gentleman who has really mastered real estate investing here, and we're going to hear his story in just a moment. I'm talking about Mike Simmons, and he is a real estate investor, a fellow podcaster, and speaker who has shared the stage with Gary Vaynerchuk at his Agent 2021 conference in Miami, Florida, and this was in 2018. So how would they know what's going on in 2021? Well, maybe we'll find out from him. We'll see. He is also the producer and host of his popular podcast called Just Start Real Estate, and a partner in Seven Figure Flipping, one of the nation's largest real estate mastermind groups. Most recently, he has written a new book entitled Level Jumping: How I Grew My Business to Over $1 Million in Profits in 12 Months, which tells the story of his success as an entrepreneur and real estate investor. Well, Mike, welcome to the Old Dogs REI Network.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I can say either for better or for worse. I'm fitting into your demographics as of September. I am turning 50 in September. So,
oh man,
there you go.
You're there, dude. You're
I'm
definitely there. Well, congrats, man. It's it's a dog's life, from here on
That's
forward.
Right. That's right.
Well, Mike, I'm dying to hear your story here. It sounds like you've definitely had an exciting time here in the real estate world. So maybe you can just tell us, about yourself, where you came from, and how you got in this crazy world of real estate investing.
Yeah, I'd love to. So I am born and raised in Michigan. So I'm a Midwest guy. Grew up, I was raised by my dad as a Marine. Was a Marine, worked in the automotive industry, union, kind of a tool and die, hands-on kind of a guy. That's just the family that I grew up in. No entrepreneurs, nobody pushing me toward entrepreneurialism or starting a business. In fact, probably quite the opposite. The goal in my family, the dream was you graduate high school, you go to college maybe. If you don't want to, that's fine. But get a union job and work there for 30 years and work as many hours as they'll let you work and retire someday and live out the rest of your life. Like that was the goal. And I bought into it because I was young, and frankly, that's a fine goal. There's nothing wrong with that. People do it all the time, and that's exactly what they should be doing because that fits what they should be doing. But what I found out was as I was going through my journey, and by the way, I got that union job right out of high school. I started working for UPS, not an automotive industry, but working for UPS, Teamsters, union. You know, my family was ecstatic, and I worked there for about 5 years. I was like 24 years old. And I had messed my back up so bad by that point that I needed to go to the chiropractor 3 days a week just to get out of bed in the morning at 24.
Ouch.
And so I knew that wasn't something I could retire from because frankly, physically, I wasn't going to be able to do it much longer anyway. So I left there, went into the automotive industry, got a pretty good job, started working my way up the corporate ladder, realized at some point in my late 20s, I didn't have my degree. I dropped out of college when I started working for UPS because I thought this is what the goal is. What am I doing in college? I'm in my union job that I was told that I should get into. So I went back to college as a early 30s something, around 32, 31, 32. And I was doing that and realized what I was working toward wasn't really making me very happy. Like I was going to work and I was progressing and I got my degree and I got promotions and raises and I just hated it. I wasn't happy, but I ended up in the corporate world for about 20 years. About 20 years I worked in corporate. So I know what that life is like. I'm very familiar with it. And I just knew that it wasn't where I ultimately wanted to be. So I got started in real estate around 2008, which is the time when most people were being told real estate's horrible, get out, get out. You know, the media, whatever the media is telling you, usually, you know, the opposite is a good idea as far as investing goes. So when they were screaming, you know, run, 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 the sky is falling in 2008, 2009, that's when I got into real estate. And it was a great time to get in. I mean, people were losing their jobs and foreclosing, which is horrible, right? For society, it was a little bit tough, but for a real estate investor, it was like kid in a candy store because it got very, very easy to find deals. And so that's when I started flipping houses at that time. And I was working my day job. I didn't quit my day job. I had kids. I had a mortgage. I had a wife, or I have a wife that is not super, super aggressive when it comes to risk. She likes a little bit of assurance that there's going to be a check at the end of the week. So I did it as a side hustle, which isn't a bad way to go. I usually tell people that's usually the smartest way to go, unless you're, 22 years old and you're living at your parents' house. Like if you have a lot of responsibilities and if your life would get significantly worse if things went wrong, it's not a bad idea to stick with your day job for at least for a while and build this company on the side. And it also kind of tells you whether or not you've got what it takes, because if you can build it on the side, then you want it, right? But if you're like, well, I'm going to go home, I'm going to get something to eat, I'm a little tired, I'm going to watch a game, eat some chips and sit down and hang out with the kids and go to bed. If that's what you want to do, there's nothing wrong with that. But it's tough to build a business on the side when you're not willing to give up watching the games or being at home at 5 o'clock every day. And, there's many a nights that I was by the way, I'm in Michigan, remind you. So in the wintertime, it gets dark at 5 and it's freezing cold. And I was in basements with flashlights, looking at electric panels and just looking at the foundation in sub-zero weathers with no lights. It was just, that's how I built my business for a couple of years.
Wow. What a story. Did you primarily look at real estate because you were sort of looking to get out of the corporate trap? I mean, was that the primary attraction, or were we just thinking of generating some income on the side?
Yeah, originally, when I was in my kind of early to mid 30s, I thought, well, there comes a time in everybody's life, especially you work 9 to 5, there comes a time when you start thinking about retirement. You don't think about retirement when you're 22, 23, 24. It's like, it doesn't even matter. You don't even think about it. But at some point, and it's different for everybody, but for me in my early 30s, mid 30s, I started thinking about retirement. Like, what does that look like? How will I know how much I need to retire? How much income do I need to generate in order for me to realistically retire? So I started doing some simple math, just taking inflation and cost of living and what I make and my expected raises and just doing that math. And I realized, my gosh, I can't retire until I'm 130. Like, I'm never going to retire. I'm not making enough, and I'm never going to have the savings that I need, because where I was at the time, I got married very, very young. So I didn't have a lot of savings even in my early 30s. So I was like, wow, this is never going to happen. And that's a desperate feeling. So I thought, I need to figure out a way to generate money on the side, or I need to figure out how to generate some passive income or some investment income. And so naturally for me, I just thought, well, stocks and the stock market and day trading, like that's the world that I need to become familiar with. And I started looking into it. I started Googling stocks and how to trade stocks and how to buy stocks and the stock market. And I hated it. I frankly hated it. It was like someone sat me down with an insurance textbook and said, you have to read this. Like I hated every bite of it. So but if you Google investing and you Google like how to, invest and different kinds of investing, eventually real estate will come up. And so when I found real estate investing on Google, I started reading success stories and I started going to people's websites where they were talking about real estate and investing and flipping houses and all these things. And I was just hooked. It was like a drug. I couldn't get enough. I just loved reading. And the problem for me was I loved learning about it and reading about success stories that it's kind of embarrassing, but the fact of the matter is this was like 2003. I didn't buy my first rent or my first investment property until 2008. So there's 5 years of paralysis analysis, being a little worried about how, whether or not I'm going to make a mistake and like all the fears that bubble up when you're thinking about doing something like this. So I've lived through it, right? When I say, and you mentioned my podcast, Just Start Real Estate, I named it Just Start Real Estate specifically because I know one of the biggest hurdles to doing real estate is getting started. People will sit back and it's safe to read about it. It's safe to learn about it. And I go to RIAs sometimes, not as much anymore, but I used to go to RIAs a lot. And when I go to a RIA, there's 100 people there and 90 of them have never done a deal. They're new and they want to learn and they're excited about the environment and stuff. And there's a handful of people that are actually doing deals. But what I realized was the phenomenon that I was getting caught up in was by reading about it and going to RIAs, I kind of felt like I was in the game, but I wasn't. I was surrounding myself with people who were in the game. I was reading about people in the game, but I wasn't in the game. And it took me about 5 years to actually get the nerve to start making offers, and I got my first deal.
Well, I'll tell you, timing wise, normally I'm like you. I'm an encourager to try and get people to get up and do it, and especially starting later in life, but in your case, your timing was impeccable because when you started it for a flipper, I mean, that was the best time in the world, right? I mean,
totally.
2003, you might have just like lost your butt, I mean, well, when the recession hit, who knows?
Yeah. Back then in 2003, I don't know when you started your investing career, but in 2003 in my market, there were people locally teaching that one strategy was appreciation. You buy a house, you sit on it for 2 years, you sell it for $10,000. Like people were teaching that as a strategy. Can you imagine if that was my strategy going into 2008? I would have been in real trouble.
No, definitely. Wow, that's a great story. So you're working. You're a corporate guy. You've got this thing on the side. You've got a young family. I mean, how are you juggling all those things? And when you finally make that commitment, how'd you pull it off?
Well, like I said, my wife's conservative. She's not someone who's like wants to just jump in head first and take risk. So for me, I needed to build my business up to where it was financially, objectively holding me back going into work every day. And I could show that with actual data. You know what I mean? Not just my feeling that I can do this, but I could show her like, hey, so the agreement was for us is I'm going to save a year's worth of my 9 to 5 salary in cash in the bank, right? So if after 8 months, it doesn't look good for me going out on my own, I'm not making it, I have 4 months to get back in the industry and find a job, which is plenty of time. So that was sort of like the fail-safe rule that we had. But, interestingly, I kept my real estate, and my wife and I kept the real estate side of what we were doing quiet from my family for a long time because I, even back then, sort of intuitively knew that if I surround myself or get inundated with a lot of skepticism and naysayers, it was going to be tough. So we didn't tell our family or our friends or anybody that we were flipping houses because my wife was helping me at the time when I first started. But the funny story is here in Michigan, the largest newspaper in the Metro Detroit area is the Detroit News. And I had off of my Facebook account, I had the Detroit News reach out to me and said, hey, we're doing a little story on some real estate investors locally. This was like 2010. We're doing the story, and we wanted to know if we could just interview you real quick. And we were like, yeah, no problem. I thought it's going to be on page G at the back of the newspaper, a little tiny blurb, no big deal. Fast forward, Sunday paper, the largest, most circulated paper of all, had a front page, full color picture, full article.
Oh,
I was like, I had not told my family yet. So that was how my family got introduced to what we were doing. I waited, and basically they didn't even know until we had a little bit of success. And then I saved a year's salary before I actually quit my job, and that was smart because it made my wife feel good about it. It helped her feel more on board with what we were doing. It took a lot of the stress out of the decision, and there came a point where I really was holding myself back. I hate to say it, and I don't advise this, but I was running a full-on flipping business from my day job. I was taking calls and kind of at my lunch time and on breaks, and I was running my business, and I was generating more doing that than I was going to work. And I had a fairly decent paying job. It wasn't a low paying job.
Interesting. And why flipping? Why did you happen to land in that area? I know there were a lot of other things going on at that time too, and you could have built up a rental portfolio. What was it attracted you to flipping in particular?
Probably at that time, HGTV had a ton of flipping shows on. They still kind of do, but it was like that was a bonanza back then of flipping shows, and that's all I knew. I knew that there was a rental play, but I kind of thought my thought was I don't have any money to buy a rental. Like, how am I going to buy rentals? I don't have the money. I didn't even know what wholesaling was at the time. So for me, flipping was the only thing I could think of to do, and I knew that for our first flip, we got a regular mortgage for it. The first flip we ever did was a mortgage, and we took our credit cards and our little bit of cash that we had, and we just sort of went all in. And I always tell people, if that first deal had gone south, if I hadn't made money, I wouldn't be talking to you right now about this. I'd be in a 9-to-5 job probably, because my wife would have shut that down hard, but she's not super, she doesn't love risk, but she also recognizes opportunity. So when we first did our first deal, we made actually pretty good money on it. I mean, I can tell you the numbers. They're not the numbers that exist now, even in Michigan, because it was, like you said, it was like the greatest time to get started because prices were so low. But we bought the house for $40,000. Now, depending on where you're listening to this from, you might think that I bought, an outhouse somewhere in the woods, but it was a 3-bedroom, full basement brick ranch in a blue collar neighborhood. It was a nice house. We bought it for 40. We put about 15 into it, sold it, I think, for like 75 and made $15,000. That was a bazillion dollars to me then. That was just like everything. So once that happened, my wife was like, holy crap, you go do more of those, go. She was fully behind it then, right? So that's all I needed was that encouragement, and I went for it. So for me, flipping was all I knew, and my day job consisted of managing timelines and managing budgets. So I was comfortable hiring contractors and then holding them to budgets and timelines. That's just what I did for a living. So it was a pretty natural, transition for me to do that.
And you didn't need to interface with them in person that often, or?
I went at lunchtime if it was close enough. I went every day after work, and I went on the weekends, and I called them I was on the phone with them every single day. So I saw the work. I'm a big fan and an advocate of, if you're flipping a house, and especially if you're new and you're only going there once a week, you are dialing up trouble. You're going to have trouble. You need to get there and see what's happening. If not every day, then most days, because, it's a lot easier to stop or fix an issue before it gets too far down the road. But, you go in and find out the flooring is wrong, and there was some miscommunication that was partially your fault. That flooring's staying, or you're going to pay to fix it. So I found it very, very advantageous, especially early on, to be there all the time so that I knew what was happening. And if something was going on that I didn't want or something I didn't agree to, I could stop it before it got too far down the road. So I was there every day. It's just what I did. It was just part of my routine.
Did you do any of the work yourself? Are you a handy guy that?
You know what? On my first flip ever, we did do some painting because we thought we're going to paint a basement. It's a basement and it's paint. We can get rollers and do it. But, I realized, and I tell people this all the time now also, The worst thing that can happen, or the worst scenario for someone who wants to flip houses, is that they have the capacity to do it themselves. Now, if you want to flip a house a year, one house, two houses, not a big deal. If you want to flip 10 or 15 houses, you're holding yourself back. So I know what things should cost, and I know how long they take, right? So if I'm hiring someone, I know exactly what it should cost and how long it should take. I can't do the work myself. So it keeps me from being tempted to do it. But sometimes when people go to flip houses and they're like a licensed plumber, they want to just do all the plumbing themselves, which is fine if you don't want to flip that many houses. But I think if you want to flip any, volume of houses, you have higher and better use of your time than going in and doing the plumbing. Like, you should be looking for deals, raising money, things that you want to focus on as the owner of the company. If you can paint, you really shouldn't be painting, in my opinion, unless you're only going to do one or two a year, and then that's fine. You're just going to kind of go take it slow, no big deal. But I was getting in my own way. Like, I had some of the workers wanted to do certain things, but they couldn't because I was holding them up. So I stopped doing the work on my own houses after the first one.
Interesting. Now, let's go back to that first house. You made 15 grand on it. So what'd you do at that point? You've got this 15,000. Did you immediately use that to purchase another house? And were you still doing mortgages, or were you doing hard money or investors?
Yeah, great question. So this was 2008, 2009 when I started. And back then, Facebook business pages were kind of a new thing. And I happened to have a guy locally who was, I wouldn't say a mentor, but he was giving me advice. And he said, here's what I would do if I were you. You've got your first property under contract. You're going to start working on it. Document everything you do. Take video of before and after. Get yourself on video talking about what you're going to do and what your plans are and all this stuff. So I started documenting that process. And through doing that, I had people reaching out to me that I knew, the people I knew from various things, saying, hey, I'm seeing what you're doing online. It's really interesting. I really like it. How do I get involved? I've got some money. I'd like to kind of partner up with you or get involved with you. How can I do that? So the funny story is we did not know for sure that we were going to make money in the middle of that project. But before the project had completed and we sold it, we already had two people that were willing to fully fund our next deal. So from that first deal on, we never used hard money or mortgages or our own money for that matter. We had people, private investors, who were coming to us wanting to work with us just because they saw what we were doing online. And we started talking about it in at RIAs and stuff. We started talking about what we were doing, and we attracted private money that way.
Interesting. The only place you were posting this was on Facebook, right? At the time, there wasn't YouTube at that time.
No. Well, if there was, I wasn't on it. So it was just Facebook. And I did it sort of reluctantly. I'm kind of a private person by nature. I'm not super outgoing. So it's funny to look back at some of these videos. They're since taken down, but where my wife and I were trying to muster up the courage to get on video and talk, because neither one of us really wanted to do it. But we just trusted this guy who said you should do it. And, back then we got funded. We got some private investors who had better options than us. There were other people at these RIAs and people that were kind of in my local market doing flips that had more experience and more track record and were more credible really than we were. But the funny thing that I realize is when you're trying to raise private money for deals, and a lot of people get discouraged, they go, well, why would anybody loan me money? I don't know what I'm doing. I'm new to this. The reality is some of the folks that we borrowed from, one in particular, this one couple who loaned us money on our first handful of deals, I asked them, I got the courage up to ask them one time, I said, a lot of investors in our market, and you know that they have more experience than we do. Why are you loaning us your money? And they said, because you and your wife remind us of us when we were younger. And at the time, we were in our late 30s. And I was like, wow. So it was a light bulb went off. When it comes to investors, investors don't invest in companies, especially private investors. They don't invest in companies. They invest in people. So if you can, create that relationship with folks who are in a position where they have capital that they want to invest, your experience is secondary to how they feel about you as a person. And that was a big lesson for me. And so I wasn't ever, from that point, I didn't feel bad about myself for not having maybe the experience that other people have, because I knew if I could just be me and they are attracted to me, and to be honest with my wife, was probably a bigger draw because she's more friendly than I am. That's what people invest in. It's not the spreadsheet that I show them of the deals that I've done. It's just the conversation that they have with me and how they feel about me individually.
Right. So that first deal, you were still working full time, right? And how long did you continue flipping? Are you scaling up at this point while you're still working full time?
Yeah, I was scaling up while I was working full time. I did the full time job with the real estate on the side for about 4 years before I made the switch.
Wow.
And I mean, yeah, wow. But you know what? It's sort of it's the easier way to do it. I mean, there's time involved, there's work involved, but it was less stressful because I had already built up that reserve, and I had kind of proven the model to myself and to my wife. So when I did end up leaving my day job, it didn't feel as risky as it would have a couple years earlier when I hadn't really gotten that experience yet.
Well, that's smart. I think that 1 year of income is definitely something that gives you, enough time, and plus over 4 years you pretty well had the flipping thing down, I imagine. Now, what did you ramp up to? You in your title to your book here, you talk about 12 months.
Yeah.
Was that from the beginning of that first flip, or was there just a certain threshold that you said, okay, from this point?
It's funny. So I flipped houses almost exclusively, was a house flipper. When I say exclusive, I mean, I was getting a few rentals here and there, but mostly if you would have asked me, I would say I'm a house flipper. I did that for 6 years. The book, in the subtitle, How I Grew My Business to Over $1 Million in Profits in 12 Months, that's technically my second stint as a real estate investor, because I got to a point with house flipping and I hit this weird fork in the road. And the fork in the road, it's kind of a long story, but the short version of it is I was relying on one contracting crew to do all of my flips. And I had a realtor who was bringing me deals and helping me evaluate what their value would be after renovation, right? So for the very critical parts of my business, I was totally reliant on these other individuals. Well, I was working on a particular deal, a flip, and my contractor, who had been very reliable and trustworthy and honest up to that point, started kind of being the opposite of that. He wasn't as reliable, and he wasn't being totally honest with me, and he was overcharging me in some areas that I caught him. So I realized I'm going to have to find a new contracting crew. And on the same deal where the contractor was flaking out a little bit, my realtor just totally missed his numbers. Like I was in a bad deal and I didn't know it until the end. And he was kind of like cavalier about it. Like, well, what are you going to do? And I was like, no, that's not an acceptable answer. What are you going to do? This is a lot of money we're talking about. So I was like, I'm going to have to find all new team and I'll put together a whole new team for my next deal. Well, around that time, I was still getting some leads organically and I was finding things on my own. And I happened to come across an opportunity for a seller who was selling their house, and they were in distress. Their house was in distress. And so I got it under contract at a really, really good price. But I knew I didn't have the crew or the team put together because I had to rebuild. So I reached out to another house flipper that I knew who needed deals. I just talked to him the week before, and he's like, my company is just dying because I can't find deals. And so I called him and said, hey, I've got this property under contract. And at the time, I had it under contract for $95. And I said, I didn't tell him that, but I said, I've got this under contract. Here's the address. Here's all the information. Would you be willing to buy it for 110? And he said, give me 10 minutes and I'll let you know. He called me back in 10 minutes, did his due diligence, and he's like, I'll take it. So I wholesaled the property to him and made $15,000. And it was the fastest, easiest $15,000 I've ever made my entire life. So I switched my model at that point. I stopped being so much a house flipper and started doing wholesaling. So that's the book, is really when I made that switch, a lot of things started clicking for me. It matched, I'm a big fan of personality assessments, personality tests. And I realized after taking a lot of these, I'm a very impatient person. I like things to move quickly. I like velocity. And so wholesaling kind of scratched that itch for me. It didn't take as long. I didn't have to deal with as many things that were outside of my control, like appraisers and mortgage companies and retail buyers and things that I didn't want to have to deal with anymore. I was kind of hit my limit with those. And I started wholesaling. And at the same time, I joined a mastermind, and I talk about it in my book, the importance and why I think masterminds are huge for people. Really, really, really can be an accelerator for you. And when I joined this mastermind, I surround myself with people who were just a little farther down the road than I was. They had been around a little longer. Their businesses were a little more mature than mine. And I started siphoning knowledge from them and just asking them what they were doing and how they did it and what did you do to get from where I am to where you are. And I started putting together and piecing together what a real good, solid, healthy business in my industry looks like. And that's where it hockey sticked for me. I switched my model to something that suited me a little better, and I surrounded myself with the right people, and my business took off. I went from doing about 2 deals a month to doing 12 to 14 deals a month in less than a year. And it was all about processes, creating systems, creating processes, and building an actual team, not people that were out like third party, but bringing people into my own team, my personal team, hiring people and partnering with people that supported what I was doing. So that systemizing, creating processes, and building my own personal team, that was the secret sauce. That's what did it.
Interesting. And did you have multiple crews, or did you just have one main crew?
When I was flipping, I had one main crew that did everything for me. It was just I was just doing so many things poorly. I tell people now, like, I coach people who are flipping. I know the game. I'm comfortable with it. I know what I did wrong, right? So I can almost do for people what somebody did for me a while back, was show them and tell them what I did wrong. Give them hindsight. Give them the benefit of hindsight. And one of the things I tell people is when you're hiring contractors and you're doing flips and you have these crews, you need to build a bench, right? Like using a baseball term. You need a bench. You need to have backup options should your first primary option not work out for some reason. You need other options. I had no other options. I had no bench. I had to start over from scratch if I wanted to find new crews. And if you have an electrician that's great, awesome. Bring other electricians into your jobs. Let them see what you're doing. Kind of get them on your bench, get them comfortable with who you are and what you do. So should you need to call them up from the minors into the majors, they're there for you.
That's great. That's great. So, gosh, you had the flipping and then you have the wholesaling. Looking at, in perspective here, what would you say was sort of your biggest mistake that you learned from? And for me, mistake isn't a bad word. I think it's important that we do these things that we can learn from and, get better. And so what would you say during, you could pick, any phase of your career here, what would you say something that you really learned from that just really changed the way you did things?
The biggest change in me and my business was I used to say or have the mindset, I had this weird circular logic. So I had the mindset for a long time that I can't hire anyone or build a real team, because I don't have a big enough business to do that. But then I would realize the only way I'm going to have a bigger business is if I get some help, if I start building a team and have people that can multiply my efforts. So I had this weird, like, not big enough, but can't get big enough unless I do the thing I'm not big enough to do, right? So once I realized that I'm not good at everything, and my time is finite, right? We all have the same amount of time, and that's no excuse, but it is finite. So I always tell people, look at your business. And I will say this, the caveat is not everybody wants to scale, and that's fine. If you want to do a flip or two a year, fine. That's perfect if that's what you want to do. If you want to do 10 or 15 flips a year, you're going to reach a point where you have to look at your business and be honest with yourself, be objective and say, what am I bad at? And what do I not like doing, or what do I not want to do? Where am I causing my own bottlenecks? And that's the first person you should probably bring on your team. People make the mistake of hiring someone who has the same skill set as them, and then you're not really solving a problem. You're just doubling down on what you're already good at, and probably the business isn't suffering as a result. But I knew, for me at least, like I said, I'm a big fan of personality tests. When I hire, it's not the only thing I use, but it's a component of my hiring process, is having them take like a DISC test or a Colby, or all these tests that are out there. And I've taken a ton of them, and I know every single one of them without fail that I've taken has screamed back at me, you are terrible at details. You should not be handling the details of anything. So the first person I hired in my company, the position was called transaction management, which means when I would get a contract from the seller, I would have them send it to the title company, and then I was wholesaling, so I would get a contract from a buyer who was going to buy the house. That would go to the title company, and then this transaction manager would handle all of the details needed and all the paperwork and everything needed to get to the closing table so that we could close on it and ultimately make money. That was the first hire because I was bad at that. I avoid detail work. And so when you avoid detail work, it makes it very difficult to get to a closing because there's details that have to be dealt with. So that was the first hire. Second hire was a salesperson. I know that I'm not the greatest salesperson in the world. I'm competent because it was my company. I would overcome my shortcomings and I would be competent at it. But building a business that scales up, you can't have somebody in a key position that's barely competent. So when I brought a sales guy onto my team who was an actual legit like career salesperson, everything changed. It was like a rocket ship going off. And I was standing back and just watching like, oh, this is what a salesperson looks like. Because I thought I was one, but I wasn't. This guy's a real salesperson, and he just started crushing it for us. So as I slowly built my team and I offloaded things that I was bad at and offloaded things that I really was holding us back, that was when everything changed for me. And that was the big light bulb that I needed to build a team if I wanted to scale.
That's excellent. What would you say was really the biggest success that you had where things just changed dramatically? I mean, it almost sounds like you just said it there, but maybe that is it.
I will say the biggest success, the biggest thing that was like if I could just point to the one decision that I made that made all the difference for me was joining a mastermind, surrounding myself with like-minded people, some of whom were farther down the road to success than I was. That was huge for me because you don't know what you don't know. And I was stuck in my little Midwest Michigan small town bubble. That's all I knew. It's all I had. It's the only reference I had to really go off of. So once I was able to be around people that had achieved at a much higher level than I had, and they had visions and aspirations that were beyond what I even thought was realistic, and I saw them doing it, like firsthand, got to see what their business looked like. It's like, I don't know, like you looked at the horizon, you can see only so far. But if you climb on top of a skyscraper, you can see for many more miles. And I felt like I was standing on top of skyscrapers for the first time, and I could see much farther down the horizon than I could when I was in my little, Midwest bubble.
And tell us about the mastermind. So was it a group that you physically met together, once a month, or did you meet by, electronically, or how did it work, just in terms of technically?
Yep. So it was a gentleman that I met as a result of my podcast. He had one too, and we kind of met that way. But the mastermind itself is called Seven Figure Flipping. I'm still in it. I'm actually on the board of directors now for it. But it's a group that meets once a quarter, basically. And there's one big event that happens in October called Flip Hacking Live. And that's the group that I joined. It's a Facebook group. We meet every quarter. There's a lot of like video tutorials and supplemental material to kind of help you with specific things you're working on. But really, for me, it was just getting access to people who would tell me, like, no holds barred. They would just tell me what the deal was with their business. And locally, when I would go to a RIA, I don't know about how other people's experience, but where I am, and at that time, 10 years ago, I'd go to a RIA, and it's like I was asking people for their social security number or their bank password. Like they just weren't being forthcoming. And they sort of would blow me off a little bit. And I don't know, maybe I was approaching them wrong, but I couldn't get straight answers from people locally. But when I joined the mastermind, it was like nobody cared to tell me what they were doing. Nobody cared to show me their KPIs. And by the way, I didn't even know what KPIs were when I started the mastermind. I had no idea what that meant. KPIs, key performance indicators, they're metrics for your company. So I started tracking my company's metrics. That was life-changing for me to learn how to do that. So the biggest thing I did is joining the mastermind and surrounding myself with people and just being around them every 2 or 3 months and having access to them online and maybe pick up a phone if I have a specific question. Just a bunch of people who were sharing freely was huge for me.
That's excellent. Well, our audience is primarily folks 50 years of age and older. Mm-hmm. They are either approaching retirement or they're already in retirement. And they're looking at real estate investing as a means to be able to either supplement, maybe there's a cash flow gap, or maybe they've got a nest egg and they want to sort of maximize the longevity of that nest egg, and then there are those that want to leave a legacy to their kids too. What advice would you have? Let's say you're talking to somebody, maybe a family or a relative, in terms of what they could do, from your experience that would really make sense for somebody. Again, later in life, they've worked a full career. They're ready to retire here. What could they realistically do to achieve those goals?
Yeah. So if I'm talking to someone who doesn't necessarily want to be super active in a business, if that's the goal in this particular case, I think that there's two attractive things. And this is something that I'm going to take my own advice. This is probably the direction I'm going to head in the coming years is I think that a rental portfolio is very, very smart. And if you live in San Diego, I don't think that a rental portfolio in your market is probably the smartest thing in the world. But there's a lot of markets out there that have very attractive rental markets, like the price points make sense. So I would really suggest going in that direction as one option. And I would look for a market that's sort of stable, has an industry that was kind of always going to be there. And you can achieving 12 to 15% ROI in your money in a rental play is not at all unheard of. In my market locally, by the way, I mentioned I have rentals. I built my rental portfolio. I get a lot of opportunities and leads and things that we wholesale out, but I built a 20 single family rental portfolio based purely off of opportunities and deals that my local market rejected. So when I get something under contract and I run the numbers and I realize I can buy it for $35,000, put $10,000 into it, and rent it for $850 a month, and I can't find a local buyer who will be interested in that, I buy it. And I built my entire portfolio off of that. My portfolio averages 14% ROI, and it's all completely rejected deals that my local, kind of spoiled buyer pool is not interested in. So there's markets out there that are insane. I like that's pedestrian in my market. $50,000 all in and rents for $850. Like you could throw a stone and hit that house all day long. So people don't realize that there are markets out there that just beat theirs, and they can find some in that local market. The other thing, the second option that I think is really attractive, especially when you're kind of heading toward retirement and you're not necessarily looking to be super active in a company, is being a private investor. All of my private investors that I've ever had have been either retirees or people really, really close to retirement who have, IRAs or 401ks or things that they can loan out of. And you can make really good returns. I mean, it's not unusual. I mean, hard money lenders are going to charge you anywhere from 10 to 15%. It's not unheard of to get 10, 12, 13% on private money. And the thing about private money is the advantage that you might have as someone who has the money to lend to an investor over like a hard money lender and certainly over a mortgage company is you can make the process so much easier. And if there's one thing that I've learned about real estate investors is we hate complications and we don't like things to be difficult. So if you can create a scenario where the investor has less hurdles to fund the deals and get the renovation done, you can charge a little bit more because 99 out of 100 of us will pay a little more for convenience and speed always. So private lending is a very powerful way to go. I like I said, I've personally made some retirees an awful lot of money over the years by borrowing their money, giving a good rate of return, and helping build their retirement funds.
That's great. Great advice. Well, you kind of touched on a little bit here, looking forward. What is it about the future of your business that really excites you? And what's sort of your end game, if you could share that with us?
Yeah. So for me, it might be a little different than other people you talk to, but I have a rental portfolio that I am going to be liquidating the vast majority of it soon because in my opinion, the market is cyclical, the real estate market. It'll always go up and down. It'll always do that. It always has, and I'm sure it always will. And for me, in my market, we're kind of at a peak. We're sort of at a seller's market still, and prices are pretty much holding steady. So for me, and the way that I approach rentals, and this is maybe could be a whole podcast around this, but the way I approach rentals, I skew toward cash flow as opposed to equity. So if you think of it as like a scale, on one end of the scale, a rental could maximize your equity opportunity, meaning it's going to go up in value fairly predictably. But a lot of times when you get to that end of the scale, the cash flow isn't as great. You have to buy it for a little more and it's going to appreciate, but a lot of times those houses don't have a lot of cash flow. And on the other end of the scale is like pure cash flow play, meaning you're buying a house. It'll never be worth more than what you bought it for, no matter what, but it'll always cash flow pretty strong because it's very inexpensive. I always kind of go toward the middle of the road or maybe skew a little bit toward the cash flow side. So I know the properties I have are probably hit their appreciation maximum for the next probably 8 to 10 years. So in kind of keeping with what I told you my end game was earlier, or part of my end game, I'm going to liquidate a lot of those and start utilizing that cash to help fund other investors' deals. So I'll be doing private lending with the money that I get back out of those properties. So that's one thing for me. I have a wholesaling company that is automated at this point. I'm not in the day-to-day of it, so that will continue going on the path that it's going. And then for me, as I kind of get closer and closer to retirement, I really enjoy teaching. So I'll probably continue working inside of the Mastermind that helped me so much and doing my podcast.
Interesting. Do you have a coaching program as well? Or?
Well, yeah, it's a kind of a mentorship slide. I don't have a personal coaching program, but I am on the board of directors of the 7-Figure Flipping Mentoring program. So that's where I put all my time and energy in terms of like, I don't have a product that I sell. So I wrote my book, I have my podcast, and then I work inside of 7-Figure Flipping. So that's kind of the teaching component, the product, I guess, component to what I do.
Interesting. Your wholesaling, you say is pretty much automated. I mean, at this point.
I built a team. Yeah, I built a team. And I say automated, I mean, I have a team. I have a team in place that does the marketing. I have people answering the phones. I've got people going out on the appointments, getting contracts. When it comes back, I have a dispositions person whose job is to take that seller contract and find a buyer for it to match it up with. And then another person who goes to the title company, gets all the paperwork together, and gets us to the closing table. So I don't have a day-to-day function on my wholesaling team. I'm just there as more of like a visionary or the head of the company, kind of guiding the boat, but I'm not rowing, so to speak.
Got it. Sort of an overseer for the most part. Yeah.
Yep.
And you're not doing any flipping anymore, right?
Very little. Every once in a while, we'll get a house under contract that, for whatever reason, the house flippers in my area don't seem excited about it. And if I believe it's a good deal, then I'll just do it myself. So we do some very strategic house flipping, but it's 5% of my business. It's very small.
Gotcha. Well, man, this has been fascinating. A lot of good information here, man. Oh man. Unfortunately, though, we're kind of running low on time here, so we have a segment we call our Wrap It Up, where I ask you a series of quick questions on resources that you have that you can share with our listeners. Helps share good information for those that are interested in real estate investing. So if you are ready, we can go ahead and wrap it up.
Let's wrap it up.
All right.
I'm ready.
Favorite real estate book?
Okay, this one's going to be a little controversial. It would have been less controversial 25 years ago when I read the book. But the first book I ever read that had anything to do with real estate that sort of stirred something inside me was The Art of the Deal. So for better or for worse, it's not a political statement. It's just I was in my early 20s and I read it and it meant something to me back then.
It's a good book.
It's a great book.
No, it's good stuff.
It's a little more controversial now, but it was a good book.
Yeah, definitely. How about favorite business book? Just general business book.
Yep. Favorite business book, the one that's impacted me the most is Traction by Gino Wickman. It's really the operating system for a business.
When you were talking, and you're talking about how you're scaling your business, that's the book I was thinking of right there.
Yep.
And it just sounds like you're right by the book, man.
Totally. We follow that very closely.
It's very good. How about most valuable website for success?
It's a great question. This is going to be a little unconventional too, but I'll tell you what, my wife and I had a conversation about this and I use it every single day. YouTube. If there's anything I don't know, if there's any skill that I need to learn, I go straight to YouTube and I find someone who's good at it and I watch videos. So I use YouTube as a tool for all things. Yeah.
And it's the same here. And I lift up the hood of the car. I've got my my phone in the other hand. Saying, what am I doing? Do the same thing when I attempt to do some rehab work or something like that, which I should never allow myself to get anywhere near anything that's going to be rehabbed. I've got my phone there. Where how do I find the stud in the wall?
Yep.
Anyway, but okay, great one. I agree. YouTube is awesome. How about favorite app?
Favorite app? That's a great question too. Again, I feel like my answers are gonna like irritate or alienate people, but I use Zillow a lot. Now, I've been in this long enough to realize Zillow is not entirely accurate. But the fact of the matter is, it's open on my phone at least once a day because I'm looking up bedrooms and bathroom, number of bedrooms and bathroom, square footage, stuff that I know Zillow does have the information on. So I use Zillow a ton, and then Google Drive, I'm in all the time. We run our business off of Google Drive, and I use the app all the time.
That's great. Two good ones. Excellent. How about a favorite quote?
My favorite quote has been and will probably always be just start. It's the foundation of everything I think that has to happen in real estate.
You got it. Just do it, right?
Yep. 100%. Yeah, except that one's taken, so I got to be careful.
Right. All right. Well, this one you could probably do. I can tell just with your background here, but this is sort of our apocalyptic question here. If you lost everything, all your assets, everything, and you're down to just $1,000 in cash, and you, knowing what you know, had to start your real estate business all over again, what would you do with that $1,000?
Yeah, good question. And I could kind of answer this with like real life example. My daughter came to me who didn't have a lot of money and said, I want to flip houses. I would start over as a house flipper, to be honest. Even though I kind of went away from it on purpose, I would do that because I think house flippers have an advantage to find deals. There are people out there whose entire existence is to find you deals, and they're called wholesalers. I do it, right? I know that. So when my daughter came to me and said, I want to start investing in real estate, I want to either flip or wholesale, what do you think? I said, start by flipping and get on every wholesaler's list and start making offers. Long story short, within a month, she had 3 deals under contract as she flipped. So that's what I would do if I didn't have a lot of money.
See, that's so interesting. I thought you would have said wholesaling.
Nope.
Because you don't have to have the cash, right? So
well, you don't have to have the cash to buy the house, but how are you going to find deals? Now, if you have a lot of time, that's something in the scenario we didn't go over. Do you have nothing but time, or are you working a full-time job? Because she worked a full-time job. She didn't have time to go out there and beat the bushes, and she didn't have the money to market. So I said, let's start flipping. I think that, to me, that's the lowest barrier to entry into real estate investing is flipping, in my opinion. That's
great. That's the first time I really even thought about that. That's true, because you've got all your wholesalers working for you, or your realtors, or whoever.
Totally.
Yeah. Whereas as a wholesaler, you've got to find the sellers, and that's a lot of work.
Yep.
Gosh, good stuff, man. Oh, this is really good. This is a great show, Mike. I really appreciate it. I'm sure there's a lot of folks listening that would love to find out more about you. How can they reach you, or maybe access information you have, or what have you? What's sort of the best way to do that?
Well, the best way to do that would be go to MikeSimmons.com. And you can check out my podcast there. You can check out other things I have going on there. And then, the book is Level Jumping. It's available now in Amazon. You can look for it there and grab that. And if you like it, give me a rating or review.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm very very excited about that. That looks like it'd be a good read.
Excellent.
Well, we have a tradition here on the show, and of course we're coming to the end here. We always have our guests give us their best old hound dog howl, to close out our show. And I know you've been practicing all week, Mike.
I've been practicing for sure. Believe me, I've given this some thought.
Okay, well, you might win the Golden Howl Award. You never know if it's good enough. We'll see.
Oh, well, you just changed everything. There's an award. I'm super competitive. I didn't know there was an award that I could win. Well, now I'm going to go for it.
All right. Oh, that was good, man. You could do voiceover for Disney with that one. I mean, that's
I had to give you a little build-up bark.
103 Dalmatians on that one. That's great. All right. Well, thanks so much for being on, Mike. This has been a blast.
Yeah, it's been fun. I appreciate you having me on. I appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, my pleasure. And I also want to thank all our old dog listeners out there, too, for joining us today. I know there's a lot of other things you could be doing right now, but the fact that you've taken the time to join us means a lot, and we really appreciate it. And please note everything we talked about today, everything that Mike shared, it will be in detail in our extensive show notes at olddogsreinetwork.com/blog. All you have to do is look for the episode with Mike Simmons. Well, that's the show for today. Remember, cash flow is king and real estate investing the means. Until next time, keep moving forward and may God bless.
Thank you very much for visiting the Old Dogs REI Network. We would greatly appreciate if you would stop by iTunes and let us know what you think of the show. We would love if you could subscribe to the podcast, give us a 5-star rating, and write a review. The more ratings and reviews we receive, the more visible the podcast will be to others. Thank you.